Hello and welcome to Addicted to Lacrosse. This is Season 3, Episode 14 for Monday, April 4th, 2016. My name is Graham Parrow. With me tonight is Melissa Daphne. Tyler Fitch is off on spring break, so he's not available this week. A couple things to talk about this week. We're going to get back to the Alex Bouquet hit on Carson Leung, which I talked about briefly last week. Not so briefly, but talked about last week, but I was by myself, so I wanted to get Melissa's thoughts on that. And now that we've got a league ruling on what happened, and we've kind of managed to gather informally opinions from around the league and around the fan base and such, we will hopefully have a bit of a conversation about attendance in Colorado, as Melissa was able to get to a game last week. And so we'll hopefully have some time to talk about that, as well as the 4 games this past weekend. And I only managed to see one of them in its entirety and bits of others, so we may kind of have to gloss over a couple of those, but we'll see what we get to. Anyway, to start off with, Alexis Bouquet took out Carson Leung pretty good in last week's game, and as I said, I talked about this last week on the show. But Melissa, and I read out what you had left me for some comments, Melissa, but I wanted to get your take on it now. What do you think?
Yeah, it was really kind of interesting because being there, the hit didn't look as bad as I felt like it did watching the video replays of it. When it was there, and maybe it's because, the excitement of the game, things just sometimes can slow down just a little bit with adrenaline and whatever. But when you looked, it almost looked like he had time to react to Bouquet, and it really felt like he just didn't think Bouquet was really coming out. But when you look at the video, it looks like it was a lot more blindsided. But in person, because we were actually on that end, so we got a pretty good vantage for it. It looked like Bouquet kind of came out and stopped, and they just kind of collided. So it wasn't even that Bouquet hit him; it really was just that they collided. So it looked a little high, but it didn't look. I remember when we had Eric Miller, and he was 6'5", I think, and he'd come out of the net all the time like that, and just floor these guys that were running down the field. So when you compare Bouquet, who is heavier, but he's definitely shorter, it's what Eric Miller used to do. And I've heard a lot of comparisons to Iliak Dallas, or Dallas Iliak, one of those days, as well as a couple other goalies. And so there's definitely a portion of the league that really seems to be looking at this, oh yeah, this is just like it used to be. And it's, no worse than anything else that's been out there. But there's definitely a portion, I know Jake Elliott and Teddy Jenner really had a lot to say. They were very, very upset that the league did not rule against it. And so there's been a lot of discussion, both from fans and former players and some others, that maybe that's because this video has basically gone viral. And so it's getting so much publicity to the league that to punish Bouquet for it now would be very detrimental. And so Bouquet didn't get penalized or fined or anything like that for what may have been, some were considering a charging hit, because it went viral and it's bringing so much good publicity that they just don't want to go down that path. So in person, I would say it did not look quite as bad as it did on the video. On the video, it does look worse. I don't know if that's just the angle of the camera or just being there. It just felt different. I don't know. But it definitely didn't seem as bad when I saw it live.
There was an awful lot of reaction on Twitter. I actually haven't seen Carson Leung say anything at all either way about the hit, but a lot of current players and a lot of former players have come out saying that was too much. Like, it's one thing to have physicality in the game and that sort of thing, and nobody's trying to get rid of that entirely, for sure. But that one crossed the line. That one was bordering on a blindsided hit. I mean, if you look at it in slow motion, it does look like Leung was able to turn around, face Bouquet, and actually see him coming. But when you look at it in real time, the amount of time he was actually facing Bouquet before he got slammed was, a fraction of a second. There's no way he had time to see that was coming and prepare himself for it. So, and it didn't look like a hit to the head to me. It looked like it was, upper shoulder kind of thing. But it was still a blindsided hit, and there's no way Leon could react to it. He did miss the next game, as it turned out. He didn't play this past weekend, whereas Bouquet did. Obviously, he was fine. There were a couple of players that said, good on you, Bouquet. That was a good, solid hit. Nothing wrong with that. But the majority of players that I saw weren't happy with it. I think Tyler Richards said it best. That was the kind of hit that other leagues are trying to get rid of. And you're right. I think the NLL did take a couple of days to respond to it. I think it was Tuesday before they put out a press release saying these are the rules that are involved here, and this is why he didn't break any of them. So technically, it was a legal hit. They didn't mention the description of the penalty for roughing is kind of vague, and I think it's probably intentionally vague, so that they can apply it to whatever situation they want, as opposed to being very specific. And they didn't mention that one, and that's one thing that Teddy Jenner said, that this could, in certainly some interpretations, meet all of criteria for roughing. There's no reason that couldn't have been a roughing penalty. The charging penalty is almost the one that I mean, that's a textbook example of charging, except that charging isn't in the rule book anymore. The league actually had a charging penalty a few years ago, and I think somebody said they removed it in 2009. Can't remember exactly when it was that it was removed, or why it was removed for that matter. But there is no charging penalty in the NLL anymore, so that's why he wasn't given that. But by the time the NLL decided to rule on it, you're right, the video had gone viral. It had been seen a million times. It was all over Deadspin and ESPN and TSN and everywhere. And the last thing the league wants to do is come out and say, that awesome hit that everybody's talking about and is getting all this thing. Yeah, well, that's not allowed anymore. So I guess they were kind of between a rock and a hard place there, in that they probably, I would guess, they wanted to penalize him, but at the same time they didn't feel right penalizing him for giving the league all of this publicity, and kind of turning all that publicity against them, because then once they get all that publicity, the last thing they want is for people to say, that awesome league that had that awesome hit, well, they just banned it, so that sucks, they're not going to do it anymore. So I guess it was a tough decision for the league, but
well, and I know from being at the game, it was a bit of a game changer. I mean, the crowd had been really quiet, which is, for Mammoth games, was strange anyway, because even when they're losing, the fans start chanting, and I mean, it's just a loud environment. And
they don't call it the Loud House for nothing, right?
Exactly. And it had been really quiet. And then he just came out and did that, and the place erupted, and everybody was back into it, and it got really loud again. And all of a sudden, you start seeing the momentum change just a little bit towards for the Mammoth. So it was definitely one of those situations. I mean, it's important to keep our players safe, especially since this is a part-time job, essentially. You don't want them to have a career-ending injury that could actually be longer lasting than even their lacrosse career. It would definitely suck to have some of these players be damaged permanently. I mean, we have lost players to injury. We had, heck, we've had occipital bone injuries from helmets breaking and things like that. So to have something that is a little more intense, but yeah, it just didn't feel as bad as it looked on the video to me. It really didn't. But watching it on the video several times, it does look a lot worse. And I don't know why it is that the two just don't match up, because in some ways it's hard to believe that's the same hit I saw, because it doesn't look the same. It actually looked different. It did seem like there was more awareness from both players, and that it didn't seem as much like he was charging. But, I guess You could say the camera doesn't lie, but so it's hard to say. But it definitely changed the atmosphere. Everybody got really into the game again, and that's what the Mammoth needed right then. So, right or wrong, it did what it was probably supposed to, and there was lots of jokes in our little section that you just knew that Ward was sitting over on the bench going, "Oh crap," because Bouquet just, did this huge hit and it was stopping stuff, and it's just So it'll be kind of interesting.
All right. I guess from that Colorado game, we can move on to the other Colorado game. Not so much the other one, the next one. This past weekend, Colorado traveled to New England to take on Black Wolves. I was going to say first place teams in both divisions, but New England is no longer in first. They were in second at the time. I think they still are. But in any case, two very likely playoff-bound teams meeting up against each other. And I didn't see most of this game. It sounds like, Melissa, you didn't see this one either.
Yeah, unfortunately, none of the games were on ESPN this week.
Nope, I get the feeling there's going to be a lot of non-ESPN games coming up that look like there was an awful lot of Fox coming up, so we may be out of luck for replays for sure. So I don't have much to say about this one other than no John Grant and no Jeremy Noble. I don't know what happened to either of them, but that's
I
big
think
blow.
the Mammoth reported that Jeremy Noble retracted his appeal. I think that's why he was out.
That does ring a bell now I think about it, yeah.
Because he was appealing his suspension and then retracted it and just took it. No idea why John Grant Jr. wasn't there, though.
So he did tweet from Disney World a day or two later, so he could have been just on vacation, but that seems like
spring break.
An odd thing for him to do. I mean, who goes away on spring break while lacrosse season's on? Anyway. Now, we don't get spring break in Canada. We had March break 2 weeks ago. So I guess it's a different thing for us. But in any case, Colorado came out on top of this one, 12-10. Callum Crawford scored 5 goals and added 4 assists in what is turning out to be by far the best free agent pickup in the last several years for any team, I think. I don't really understand what happened with Crawford in Minnesota/Georgia. If he was available, I cannot imagine the Swarm tried to trade him and couldn't. Maybe they were asking for far too much and couldn't get him, so they just released him, or I believe he became a free agent. And Colorado snapped him up. Awfully good move, seeing as he's leading the team. And when you're leading a team that has people like Adam Jones and John Grant and Jeremy Noble, you're doing okay. So like I said, I didn't see much of this game. So not much more to say on that other than Callum Crawford did an outstanding job in that game.
Yeah, he has been an impressive pickup. He's really gelling. I think him and Jones are just a great tandem.
Next game, I guess we can talk quickly about the Saskatchewan-Calgary game because neither of us saw this one either, so we don't have much to say on this either. Other than Saskatchewan led pretty much throughout, but Calgary was never out of it. They actually got back to within 1 with only about 8 minutes left. Excuse me, and but as they generally do, Aaron Bold and the Saskatchewan defense stepped up and did not allow Calgary to actually tie the game up, and held on to win. Best news out of this game, excuse me again, is a sellout in Saskatchewan. How awesome is that? They had almost 15,000 people in Saskatchewan. And as Paul Tutka pointed out on Twitter a day or two later, if you take the amount of people that were at the Vancouver game, the Georgia game, and the New England game and add them up, you get 10,000 or so. And they had almost 15,000 in Saskatchewan for one game. So that's awesome to see in Saskatchewan. So good job there.
Yeah, I love seeing them doing so well with attendance. And it's kind of strange the past few years to see such a difference with the Rush Calgary games because a few seasons ago, I remember there was a lot of fans that were upset because Calgary got to play Edmonton 3 or 4 times, and they had just been dominating them and dominating them. So it was like, well, gee, they just got 4 easy wins. And so now to see the tide turn, and it's like the Rush have been dominating Calgary a little bit, it's definitely a different change. And it's pretty impressive for Calgary to keep the Rush scoreless for the third quarter. So that rivalry is going strong, I'm sure.
It is, and now they're competing in attendance as well. I mean, the Roughnecks are, I think they're still averaging in the 9 or 10,000 range, and now Saskatchewan's actually beating them. Whereas, I mean, Edmonton had averages above 10,000 for the first couple of seasons in Edmonton, and then they gradually declined. And I mean, if you're pulling off 10,000 people per game on a 1 in 15 team, you're doing something right. But whatever they did right in the first couple of years seemed to go away because in the last few years they were down near the bottom in attendance, despite the fact that they had the best team in the league. Yeah, so it's nice to see that hard work pay off, even if it's in a different place. So sorry to the Edmonton fans. Hopefully you'll get a new team next year or the year after. But it's nice to see the Rush doing really well in Saskatchewan. Game number 3, Buffalo and Georgia. Speaking of low attendance, 3,000 something people in Georgia. This was a Saturday night game. This was not like, I mean, we've talked about Georgia attendance before, and okay, well, on Friday night maybe they don't get so much. They've had a couple of Sunday afternoon games where they didn't bring anybody in, and that's kind of understandable. But Saturday night, that's kind of the prime time for lacrosse games, and if you can't bring in the fans then, with somebody like Dane Smith coming to town, I don't know what you can do. So hopefully we're not talking about another NLL team lasting exactly 1 year in a certain city, because that's happened before as well. So hopefully the Swarm can do something to turn that around. I imagine winning more games would probably help, but that's not happening either. So I have to say this game was much closer than the other ones, even though the other ones ended up fairly close. This one was close all the way through. Buffalo had some leads, and Georgia came back and took leads, and Buffalo took leads, and just kept going back and forth until early in the fourth quarter when Buffalo scored 5 straight, and that kind of did it. Weird, just some weird plays in this one, or not so much weird plays, but weird on the score sheet. Dane Smith didn't get his second point until the third quarter. He scored the first goal of the game about a minute and a half in, and then didn't score again till a minute and a half into the third quarter. So he went 30 minutes without a single point, which for Dane Smith is unbelievable this year. He ended up with 7, so that's a little on the low side for him, but still excellent for anybody else. 5 goals, was it? Yes.
Yeah, looking at your notes with him being practically invisible, it was like, wait, what? What did he do? It was like, well, hey, he's still got 5 goals. But like you said, he's been such a powerhouse for the Bandits that keeping him only to 5 goals and 2 assists probably was about all that Georgia could do.
Yeah, that's what you're going for. As long as he doesn't have one of his 10 or 12 point nights, then keeping him to 7 is not bad considering. Unfortunately for the Swarm, everybody else on Buffalo had a pretty good night as well. So they ended up, excuse me, they ended up with 18 goals. Georgia had 14, so I mean their offense is doing well. It's their defense that's the problem, I think. Yeah, Cosmo was really good throughout the game. I mean, I only saw the first half, but he was really good in the first half. Like I said, Dane Smith came back in the second half and was his sort of typical self. He now, I think if he averages 4 points a game for the rest of the season, he will break Sean Evans' record. And 4 points a game, he hasn't had as few as 4 points a game yet this year. The lowest he's had is 5 once. Every other game has been 6 or higher. So the new scoring record is pretty much guaranteed for Dane Smith.
That's crazy that record stood for so long, and within like 2 years it's been broken. And is looking to be broken again.
John Tavares had it for years, and then John Grant grabbed it, and it lasted another. When did Grant get it? To
I think
2012.
I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, maybe. I think it was
Yeah,
like his first or second year here.
I think it was 2012 when he scored his 116 points, 116. I think it was 116, and that broke the 10 or 12-year-old record from Tavares. And then Sean Evans blew that away last year with 130, and we talked about, will anybody ever get 130 again? And then the next year somebody's going to blow it away by 20. So odd. What more to say about it than just odd? Final game of the weekend, Toronto against Vancouver, which I called the Battle of the Basement. I kind of wish Tyler was here to talk about this one, because I know he watched it, and I saw 1 or 2 tweets of his during the game, so I know he was watching it, but I wanted to get his opinion on a couple things to see what he thought. But I mean, I liked the game. I imagine Tyler liked the game except for the result, because it was certainly an entertaining game. It was back and forth, like I said, with the Buffalo game. It went back and forth, and Toronto had some leads, and Vancouver had some leads. Nobody led by more than 2. Toronto was missing Colin Doyle and Brett Hickey, while Vancouver was missing Garrett Billings and Logan Schuss. Toronto had all kinds of other injury issues as well. They lost Sandy Chapman. He was a scratch for this game, or he went to the IR actually before this game. And so they brought in, I'm forgetting the guy's name. They brought in Luke Magnan, and they brought in Mark Farthing and Colin Boucher. Boucher lasted the game, so he was okay. But Luke Magnan was injured early in the game, and so they lost him. And then Mark Farthing looked like he blew out a knee. This was closer to the end of the game, so he actually made it to the end. But you lose 2 players to injury, and you bring in 2 others, and neither of them finishes the game because they're injured as well. So both the Rock and the Stealth are just getting killed by injuries. And they don't want to make an excuse for that's why we're in last place, but it is awfully hard to get any kind of consistency when you don't have the same lineup 2 weeks in a row the entire season. And when the Stealth bring in somebody like Billings and Schuss and look at their offense and think this is going to be an awesome offensive lineup, and then you lose both of those guys for multiple games. They've got their new head coach in there for a couple of games now. He's never seen Garrett Billings play. Well, obviously he has, but not for his team. So that's rough for both teams. Toronto came out on the winning end of this one. What else did I want to say? Tyler Richards was unbelievable in this game. I mean, Nick Rose was good. He made some really good saves and played really well. But Tyler Richards was just outstanding. He made an awful lot of, oh my God, how did he stop that kind of saves, and just one after the other too. It was amazing. So it was an awfully close game, and obviously Toronto did pull out the win. But if Richards hadn't played the way he did play, it would have been over long before it actually was. Oddly, he made one amazing save, and I believe it was Stefan LeBlanc. And right after he made the save, he held the ball, whistle blew. He came out and basically karate chopped LeBlanc across the arms. Blatant chop right to the arms, right in front of the ref. No call at all. I tweeted that it made Bouquet's hit look like a little bump. That may have been a bit of an exaggeration, but it was an obvious slash, and I don't know why there was no call on that. Somebody else tweeted back to me, it's like, well, that's because he's a goalie and goalies get away with stuff. And maybe true, but
yeah, there's definitely some truth to that, because I remember when Brett Metke went after and speared, like just slammed down his goalie stick on Brian Langtree in the crease. He almost got away with it. Like the refs weren't going to call it, and I just remember the place was going nuts. So I would agree with that. Goalies get away with just a little bit.
I guess they're facing a rock hard lacrosse ball coming at them 100 miles an hour. So I guess they're given a bit of slack here and there.
Maybe just
That
because
said,
to do that you have to be nuts, and so people are like, you know what? Let's not mess with the crazy guy.
there's probably a pretty good element of truth to that as well. Um, the stealth in general were actually quite undisciplined in this one. Joel McCready of all people is not somebody you'd think of as you know a psycho or somebody who's going to take really dumb penalties. Um, but at one point in the game, he knocked Billy Hostrauser down. I don't remember exactly what was happening in the play there, but he knocked Hostrauser down. Then he went right to the net and scored a nice goal. And then as he's turning back to head to the bench, he starts chirping at Hostrauser. Hostrauser was down, like literally still trying to get up because it looked like he had injured his knee or his leg in some way, and he was basically trying to stand up using his lacrosse stick as a crutch to be able to stand up. And he hadn't even gotten to the point where he could stand yet, and McCready was chirping at him on the way back towards the bench. And I don't know what he said, but it was enough to get him a penalty. So he scored the goal and went straight to the penalty box. And then a little while later, this is actually near the end of the fourth quarter, I think. Oh no, sorry, it wasn't. It was in the fourth quarter, but not later. There was another thing that I'll get to in a minute. Jeff Gilbert gave him a cross check to the head, and there's no question this was a cross check to the head. It should have been penalized. There was no penalty called. So McCready went down, got up, and as Jake Elliott said, he lost his marbles. He just went off on Gilbert. Basically, it just attacked him, and the refs. I think it took 2 refs to pull him off. He got. Yeah, this is one of these rare occasions where you get 1 fighting penalty and not 2. McCready was given an instigator, a fighting major, and a game misconduct, and Gilbert was given a 2-minute minor for roughing. So I don't know what happened to McCready there, but he just lost his mind. And then the other thing I was going to say, so that was at 6:36 of the fourth. The other thing was Jeff Molesky went after Jeff Gilbert later on. This was with 15 seconds left in the game, and they both went 5 for fighting. And Molesky also got a game misconduct in that one as well, so I'm not sure what happened, what the game misconduct was for. Wasn't a heck of a fight, really. They both kind of grabbed jerseys, tossed their helmets off, spun around a little bit, threw a few punches. A couple of them actually landed, but it wasn't really that much of a fight. But props to Gilbert for going after or for standing up for himself against Molesky, because Molesky's a tough dude. And the weirdest thing I think in this game was after it was over, once the teams were heading towards their benches, Brandon Miller, who play a rock bench, and went after Tyler Richards, and it almost looked like they were going to come to blows. So I was one of the things I was going to ask Tyler about, if he knew anything about what happened there, but they basically had to pull Brandon Miller off of him, and both teams ended up just going straight to the dressing rooms with no handshakes, because there were just tensions were a little high at that point.
Yeah, I could have seen that turning into a bench clearing brawl. I haven't had one of those in several years.
No, and if we're talking about things that would have gotten the NLL a lot more publicity, that's another thing.
Yeah, because the last one I can recall was the Albany attack and the Colorado Mammoth, and that was definitely before Twitter really was big or YouTube was really doing much. So yeah, that one
The
didn't
Albany
really
attack, that was
anything.
a number of years ago.
Yeah, that was actually my first game.
Oh yeah. Well, there was a bench clearing brawl with Toronto and Buffalo in a preseason game. I think this is 3 or 4 years ago now, but that one made the rounds as well and got all kinds of publicity. And again, some people were saying, "See, that's what lacrosse is all about," and the rest of us were saying, "No, it's really not." But if that's what's going to get people talking about lacrosse, maybe it's not so bad, I guess. But so that was the Toronto-Vancouver game. Oh, and congrats to Rhys Dutch, who scored not only his 300th career goal, but his 700th career point. Oddly, he's still stuck at 399 assists, because he also got his 301st career goal. So congrats to Dutchy for those impressive numbers. And the other thing that we wanted to talk about was attendance. And Melissa, you had some thoughts on this.
Well, yeah, I would definitely like to have you add, with your blog post that you wrote about it. It's been very interesting lately. I've had several conversations with several different fans from around the league. I thought maybe this was just kind of Colorado Mammoth disenfranchisement, but there's a lot of long time season ticket holders that are giving up their tickets, and they used to be really rabid about the game. Like, they would schedule their life around the games, and this season and last season, and they're just really very meh. Yeah, I guess I'll go. I'm not really excited anymore. And so there's been lots of discussion as to why. Um, and I think some of it maybe does vary from league to league, or not league to league, team to team. The environments, obviously, we know teams like Vancouver, they've just been struggling. But when you have longtime franchises like the Wings, who are had to move because they just couldn't get butts in the seat. We have the Toronto attendance is down. We have Colorado is down, and the reason I'm always disputing what they say about their attendance, let me show you the pictures I took at last week's game. This was about midway through the first quarter, so it settled in a little bit, but not much from this. So let's see. If this is going to work. I've never done this, so I apologize if this doesn't share right. So this was straight across from me. As you can see, the center section's mostly full, but it's pretty empty on the sides. And this was a section that I do, because I've almost always sat above these sections. I do not remember them ever being this empty when I look down. And then these are the corners. So this is Mammoth reporting over 14,000 attendance, and our side was just as empty. Club was relatively empty. Third tier was very scattered. So I can't really say that it looked anything like that. So that's yay. Hopefully that worked. So when you're seeing things like that, the Mammoth used to sell out almost every game while Gary Gait was playing. And then when he retired, even though he was coaching, you could see attendance dropped 2,000 or 3,000, but it was still pretty solid. But within the last 4 or 5 years, I know a lot of season ticket holders that have given up their tickets, have been considering it. At one time, the season ticket holder base was larger than the Avs or the Nuggets. They had almost 10,000 season ticket holders, and I know that's just gotten smaller. I myself gave up my tickets for a lot of reasons this season, and that's been an interesting adjustment for me because, like many of my friends, I would plan my life around the Mammoth games, and so to suddenly not have tickets for one of those reasons, I'm in that number of people that has kind of, maybe this isn't my thing anymore. Which I can't quite say that either. That's not totally true because I'm still fanatical about it. But
you might say addicted to lacrosse.
Yeah, just a little addicted. But it's been very interesting having these conversations. Why is attendance dropping? For me, part of it with the Mammoth has been the schedule. I cannot attend a single Friday night game. And so when we have 4 and 5 of those, that's 5 games that I can't even give away. I used to, on Facebook, when I had extra tickets or I couldn't go to a game, which was rare, it was usually extra tickets. If I said, hey, I have tickets for such and such Mammoth game, within 5 minutes, I would have 3 people saying, hey, I want them. I can't even give free tickets away for club seats. So when you can't even give tickets to an event away, there's an issue there. And when you go, and I was really surprised because this was the first Mammoth game I've actually been able to make this season, and the crowd was in general much quieter. That might be because this is the first season that we didn't have Willie B announcing, and he was such a fanatical person himself, and he's a little crazy anyway. That might have been part of it. So for Colorado, losing some big name players, We haven't been to the Cup game since 2006. There's a lot of people that don't like John Grant Jr. There's definitely a lot of discord, I think, in the fandom. So I thought this was just the Mammoth. But then I talked to others around the league and other Mammoth fans, and I keep hearing the same things. And so some fans have definitely said that the game has changed so much that even though it's higher scoring, it's not as intense, not as fast paced, not as heavy hitting. So when you see hits like bouquets, that was the anomaly, whereas that used to be kind of typical. Like I said, I remember seeing Eric Miller coming out the net like that almost every game. So when you go from that level of excitement, bench clearing brawls and fights almost every game, to now it's a lot more family friendly. It's a lot more. I don't want it to sound bad, but it's a lot more skill based because we know that we had some very talented players, but less of the focus was on their skills, whereas I think more of it is now. It's very interesting, and I know you wrote about Toronto's attendance dropping, Graham. So did you have something to add?
Yeah, the pictures you showed look fairly similar to what I would see at a typical Rock game over the last couple of years. And for those of you listening on the podcast, I'll try and get those pictures up on addictedtolacrosse.com so that you'll be able to check those out, because you probably couldn't hear the picture very well.
Yeah, it wasn't very descriptive. I'm sorry.
I mean, it's kind of disappointing when if Colorado is announcing 13, 14,000 people at a game, and that may be how many tickets they gave away, and actually 7,000 people showed up. I don't know what the rules are for announcing attendance, and it almost sounds like as long as you give out the number of tickets that were sold or given away, then you can call that attendance. But the actual number of people who attended the game, which I would have guessed is the definition of attendance, if that's far less, if you gave away 5,000 tickets and those 4,000 of those people didn't show up, you can't include those 4,000 in your attendance numbers, or you shouldn't be able to. So, and we've seen that in Georgia as well, where you see on the screen as you're watching the game, there's just empty sections everywhere, and like the pictures you showed of Colorado were jam-packed full compared to these ones where you'd see an entire section with 4 people in it. The section next to them's empty. The section next to them has a handful of people here and there, and they're still reporting 3,000 or 4,000 people at the game. And you're thinking, there can't be 3,000 or 4,000 people at the game unless they're counting all the staff and the parking people and the people you can't see. But that's also misleading. So, yeah, as you said in my blog article about the Rock, we go to Rock games and they'd be ready to announce the attendance in the fourth quarter, and we'd all look around going, what do you think, 17-5? And some games were like, oh, it's pretty darn packed in here. You can see way up in the corners there's still people there. So we're talking 18-5 now. And that lasted for a good few years until 2006 or 2007 or thereabouts, when honestly the Rock started losing. Once they weren't having 12-4 seasons, they started having, I mean, they never got really terrible, but they were down in the 500 range, and they missed the playoffs a couple of years, and the attendance just tanked. Unfortunately, once they left, they never came back. So even once they got good again, they got Colin Doyle back, they got Terry Sanderson back. They went to the championship one year and won it the next. Attendance went up a little bit, but I mean, it went up from 11,000 to 12,000, as opposed to the 15, 16, 17 they had 3 or 4 years before that. So, yeah, it's disappointing to see that, especially when you hear people talk about, oh, once you get somebody coming to a lacrosse game, they're there for life. Yeah, well, that doesn't seem to be the case. There's certainly people like us who go to lots of games, or go to as many as they can, and pay attention to the league and pay attention to everything. But the number of people who come and say, wow, that's a lot of fun, I'm not going to bother going back again, seems to be growing, and I don't know what they can do.
Well,
there are people talking about. Sorry.
I remember a little while ago, it's probably been about 6 years, Some of the other teams were making a fuss that it was unfair that Colorado could be, touted as doing so well with attendance because we had all our $5 tickets. Well, they still have, I think they may have gone up to $8, but they're still under $10 a person. And when you look up on third tier, there's hardly anybody. So it's not even just a cost thing at this point. There's something else going on. And like you said, I mean, I remember we did like 3 or 4 road trips, which going from Colorado to another team's stadium is a bigger deal than what you guys have on the East Coast a little bit. It's not just a couple hour drive. It's 9 hours just to drive out of the state, depending on which direction you go. Maybe it's 11 the other way. So to go on road trips, I mean, that was a really big commitment. And I don't think I could even get a group of fans together right now. Whereas before, it was like, let's do it this year. This is where we're going. Okay, let's go. And you'd have good 20, 30 of us. And I just can't even see getting that together now.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I don't know if it's the game itself. There's people talking about how it's less rough than it used to be. And you see, like you were saying, the bouquet hit on Carson Leung is such an unusual event now that it gets all kinds of press for the league, where that was not that unusual 10 years ago. People talking about the Dallas Elliott hit that you were talking about as well, and Eric Miller. I remember one that a Buffalo goalie named Corey Quinn pulled on Glenn Clark when he played for the Rock, and it was actually almost a carbon copy of the bouquet hit, other than I'm not even sure Clark had the ball when he was nailed. He was going up for the same sort of thing. He was by himself. He was turned around looking for the pass from probably from Bob Watson, though I think somebody might have said it was Cosmo. Anyway, and either just as he received the ball or just before he received the ball, Corey Quinn came out and just flattened him. And I remember that because Quinn actually got a charging penalty, and it was a major penalty, and because he's a goalie, he had to go to the penalty box to serve it himself, which is something you never see in any other sport either. Yeah, so those kind of hits, I guess, were more prevalent 10 years ago. There's also the speed of the game that you mentioned as well. And I don't remember to that level of detail the game 10 years ago, but I do know that if there's a lot of transition and a lot of back and forth really quickly, rather than go up to the other end, wait till your team comes out, and then start throwing the ball around, and then go up to the other end, wait till all their offensive people come out and your defensive people come out, and then start playing, that can really slow things down. Whereas if there's lots of transition going on and you got the offensive guys coming back playing defense because they don't have time to get to the bench, that can be really exciting. And that's when you hear the fastest game on 2 feet and think, yep, that's what it is. But when there's these 10-second pauses as the one guy stands with the ball while everybody else on the floor is going on and off, this is what they're talking about when they say there are no two-way players anymore. And I think we're starting to get back to that. I don't know if it's going to be as it was in the late 80s or early 90s or something, long before I watched it. But when you've got players that are strictly offense and other players that are strictly defense, and they never end up on the wrong side of the floor, that means that there's going to be a delay while people change, and that can slow everything down.
So yeah, I think if anyone has any comments they want to add, we definitely want to hear from you. So if you have anything to add to this discussion, send it our way. We'd love to have it.
We'll definitely come back to this next week, if not in multiple future weeks. It's something we'd like to get more input on, as not only just Tyler, but from listeners as well. All right, we can move on to our predictions from last week, which are pretty darn good. I went 3 and 3. I was going to say 3 and 4. 3, 4, 4, 3 and 1. Only got the Colorado New England game wrong. Tyler's picks were the same as mine, so he also went 3-1. And Melissa, congratulations, you were perfect again. After a 7-0 week last week, you went 4-0 this week.
I still can't believe that. 7-0. That's so awesome.
So I think you're 12-0 in your last 12 picks. So that's
oh wow, that's a lot of pressure.
So I'm actually approaching 500 now. I'm at 27-32 on the season. Tyler just passed 500 at 30-29, and you are way above at 35-24. So, as we are wont to do, since you are in the lead and won last week, you get to give your picks first.
So this week, making my picks actually kind of scared me, because when you look at it, this one almost seems very cut and dry. So I just know there's going to be a spoiler or two, because you just can't keep a bad team down for long, I would say. So for New England and the Rush, I'm going to go with the Rush. They're just playing really well. It's hard to not pick them. I think New England's definitely going to give them a battle. I don't think it's going to be an easy game. And then against New England and Toronto, I am going to go with New England. And Buffalo and Rochester with Buffalo, Calgary and Vancouver. I'm going to go with Calgary, and Colorado and Georgia. I'm going to go with Colorado.
And before I list my picks, I want to say, first of all, I made them before Melissa made hers. And
yes, you did.
And two, they're all the same. So, and yeah, I kind of ran into the same thing. Like, Rochester and Buffalo, can Rochester beat Buffalo? Sure, they can. But Rochester seems to be struggling a lot more this season than they have in the past. We looked at the Nighthawks earlier this season and thought, okay, well, they're kind of slow starters. They don't always start off, 6-0 or 5-1. But by the end of the season, they've really turned it on. And I mean, they won a championship with a sub 500 season a couple of years ago. They don't seem to be turning it on quite as much this year as they have in previous years. Meanwhile, Buffalo has Dane Smith, and if they just put him and Cosmo, just the two of them, they'd give Rochester a run for their money, I think. So I'm Saskatchewan, New England. Saskatchewan's one of the top teams for several years. They also seem to start slow, but they are really turning it on lately. I'm going with Saskatchewan there. New England and Toronto, I really hope I'm wrong, obviously, as a Toronto fan, but New England played really well last week, didn't win, but Evan Kirk's having a great season. Sean Evans, I think we mentioned this, I think I might have mentioned this last week, that he is on pace to break his own scoring record, but everybody's ignoring him because Dane Smith's 20 points ahead of that. So Sean Evans is Sean Evans, but at the same time, he's also changed teams and changed teammates and changed everything, and still having an outstanding season. So I'm going to have to go with New England on that. Rochester and Buffalo, I mentioned already. I'm going with Buffalo. Vancouver, Calgary, fighting it out for the final playoff spot in the West, seeing as the Rush and Mammoth have already clinched. But Vancouver is so badly injured, there's nobody left. If Tyler Richards plays the way he did last week, this could be a really solid game. But somebody needs to score the goals in Vancouver, and if half their offense is injured, that's not going to help. So I'm going for Calgary there. Colorado, Georgia. Georgia seemed to start off strong and has their offense is still doing okay, but the defense not so much. And Colorado is Colorado this year, so I'm going with the Mammoth there. We don't have picks from Tyler. We will try to get those during the week so that we can have a conversation next weekend as to how we all went 5-0. I guess.
See, now you just jinxed us.
Yeah, probably.
We're probably going to go 0-5.
Next week's going to be the week of the surprise game and all 5 of them.
Has anyone in the East clinched a spot yet, Graham?
No, actually, I posted an article on my blog today about possible playoff outcomes that are a little unusual. It's still possible for Buffalo to miss the playoffs. It's still possible for New England to miss the playoffs. Nobody's been eliminated. it's more than likely that it's going to be Buffalo, New England, and probably Rochester. But it's, like I said, it's still possible for anybody in the East. A lot of unusual things would have to happen for Toronto and Georgia to make it, but it's possible. And I'm not entirely sure that both Toronto and Georgia could make it. Probably one of them could if the other one loses a lot, but I didn't look into that particular scenario. Whereas in the West, it's Colorado and Vancouver fighting it out for the last spot, and Vancouver would pretty much have to win out in order to get it. So the West is almost set, whereas the East is wide open.
Yeah, I would definitely put my money on Calgary. The Stealth, they have a lot of talent, but they've just had a rough season, and I don't see it getting any easier.
No, I would have to agree. I guess that will do it for this episode, unless you've got anything else that you want to talk about, Melissa.
No, I think we probably talked everyone's ears off enough.
All right, this has been another episode of Addicted to Lacrosse. For the absent Tyler and Melissa, I'm Graham. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.